All right, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. Thank you for rating and reviewing us on iTunes. Thank you for getting my book, Filthy Rich Politicians. And if you don't do this already, please support this show at patreon.com/Matt Lewis. Happy to welcome back today, friend of the show, a man who needs no introduction anywhere in the civilized world. He's a staff writer for The Atlantic. He is the author of Trumpocalypse, our friend David Frum.
Happy 2024 to you.
Happy New Year. Welcome back. And it's interesting times. We are talking here just a few days out from the New Hampshire primary. Obviously, we had the Iowa caucuses last week. Any hope? What do you think? Any hope for Nikki Haley in New Hampshire and everything after?
How long have you been banging the drum that this isn't a real contest, that Trump has it in the bag?
Well, I have gone back and forth, to be frank, about that, because I think I've always said that there is a narrow window, that if all the stars aligned for Nikki, I wouldn't bet on it, but there was a possibility.
Yeah. Look, I think one of the things that this contest has made me recall is advice back in the days when I talked more to politicians than I do now. One of the pieces of advice I gave, especially to sort of people running for city council, lower level offices, is if you lose, how would you like to remember the race? What will be a comfort to you in later years to say, yeah, I lost, but I lost. I went down fighting for what I believe in. Because I was like, it's a binary chance. There's at best a slight majority that you're going to win, but there are no guarantees. So you always need to be thinking about that other scenario. If I lose, how would I like to lose? And I don't think when this race is over that Ron DeSantis will be able to look back on it with anything like pride. He campaigned on a galaxy of the world's stupidest issues, and then Nikki Haley, I think,
punching babies.
Yeah,
it's a call back to a previous episode.
Personality is unfixable, but really, you're campaigning on anti-vax nonsense and sex education in the Florida public schools, and this is why you want to be leader of the free world, commander in chief of the United. It's ridiculous. It's unworthy. So Nikki Haley has articulated a more serious case. But when she looks back on this, should she lose, as she probably will, she'll look back and say, I wanted to be commander in chief, but I was never willing to go after the person who was standing in my way. And I let fear, I lost, and I lost looking like I was afraid. So if you're going to lose, probably anyway, why not lose in a way that brings you credit in your old age, where you can look back on and say, that was the race I wanted to run. So that's where we are. That no one has been willing to say. I think DeSantis is toward the very end, but always in a way like this is someone else's issue. Trump will be a distraction. What's the difference between you and your opponent? On voting day, my opponent is likely to be in prison, and he will, because he tried to overthrow an election, and I won't do that. And now let's talk about the issues. None of them were willing to stand up, and so
they just said, David,
on the inside before they started.
That line you just delivered reminds me, they asked Pat Buchanan, and by the way, let me just say, I'm a big Pat Buchanan fan, not in terms of his philosophy. I'm not a populist. I'm not a lot of things he may or may not be. But I thought he campaigned with panache and a sort of happy warrior. I like that. And they said to him, and he might have ripped this off, but they said to him, what are you going to do the first day in office? And he said, probably turn to William Jefferson Clinton and read him his Miranda rights. He had those lines. And I think what you just said about my opponent's going to be in jail on election day.
Yeah.
Those zingers, and you can even do it with a little bit of humor, even if you want to, right? I mean, Pat was able to say harsh things like, Bill Clinton's only foreign policy experience was going to the International House of Pancakes. You can attack somebody hard and run hard, and also do it in a way that's that's charming, flatter.
Yeah, and at least say, Why'd you do it? Why did you ask all of those donors to give you all of that money? Why did you spend all those nights on the road away from your family? One of the reasons why normal people turn their backs on politics a lot of the time is politics asks the question, it's a Tuesday evening, you can spend this evening with the people you love best in the world or with a room full of total strangers. And most people say, I'll choose option A, and politics involves choosing option B. So there has to be a strong reason. And if you've got that strong reason, you might as well talk about it. I mean, Ron DeSantis did not run to be president because he actually is an anti-vax stupido. He's not an unintelligent man. The anti-vaxxers aren't necessarily unintelligent, but they're either unintelligent or crazy, and he's neither. So why is this your top issue? There are other things you care about more. Talk about them, and then when it all goes bad, as it has, he's going to look back on this race and kick himself for the rest of his life, as he, by the way, deservedly so, because he ran. Again, the personality can't be fixed, but the issues could be.
Do you think if DeSantis, so I think there's one theory that says, look, DeSantis's plan was that Trump was going to fade. That never happened. And then the indictments come down. And once that happens, it's a fait accompli. DeSantis is done. Trump is the nominee. That's one theory. The other theory is, well, no, maybe DeSantis should have gotten in earlier and he could have laid the groundwork for the coming indictments. And he could have, instead of providing a permission structure for blaming the politicization of the legal system, he could have weaponized it and used it. Do you think there's a scenario where if DeSantis had played his cards differently, he actually could have beaten Donald Trump?
Those are the scenarios you outlined, or the complaints you outlined, come from National Review Fantasy World. And they remind me of a joke that the Poles told during communist times. So there are two plans for reforming Polish communism. One was the practical one, and one was the miraculous one. One plan was that the Virgin of Czestochowa and all her ministering angels would descend from heaven and transform the Polish economy by divine intervention. That was the practical plan. The other plan was that communism would reform itself, and that was the fantasy. So, look, Trump's a criminal. Obviously, criminals get into legal trouble. If you say, look, my strategy for winning this nomination is to hope that Trump's inevitable criminal legal difficulties will not catch up to him before New Hampshire, because if they do, the party will vote for the indicted criminal. Then you've got a bad theory of the race. Maybe you're in the wrong party. I mean, if you really believe that
or the wrong business,
that being an indicted criminal is in the Republican context a help, why the hell are you a Republican? Why are you hanging out with those people? Who likes indicted criminals? Fellow criminals. You shouldn't be in such an organization. I don't believe it's true, by the way, about Republicans that they. So I think what DeSantis, there is a circle of people around DeSantis who want to make it the New York Times' fault that DeSantis lost the election. But the point was, DeSantis lost the election for the same reason, lost the nomination, as it looks like he will. Haley too, but they were broken on the inside. They were too weak and afraid to stand up and say, Trump's going to be indicted. That's not an asset to Trump. That's an asset to me. That is a detriment to Trump. He will be indicted. Of course he'll be indicted. He deserves to be indicted. He's a criminal. He steals from people. He tried to overthrow the government. We want no part of that. And this is your chance to vote against it. Now, if you lose then you can vote for Biden easily, because, my God, the people, I spelled out the guy's criminality. They nominated him anyway. Yeah, obviously he needs to lose, and the party that would nominate such a person needs a big lesson at the polls.
Yeah. No. So it seems to me that the Republican Party indeed likes the indictments. The indictments help Donald Trump. And I think it's because this whole line about they're not coming after me, they're coming after you works. I think there's like a victimhood complex, an inferiority complex, a persecution complex in the Republican electorate. And maybe it's not 50%, but it's a plurality. It's enough to that clearly the indictments help Trump. But you disagree?
No, but this gets to something I thought we might want to talk about later in this podcast. But so one of the things I've been worrying about for really 20 years is the stated ideology of the Republican Party, or the formerly stated ideology of the Republican Party: markets, internationalism, strong American presence in the world. rested upon optimism, self-confidence, and personal efficacy. The voting base of the Republican Party was shifting toward people who didn't have the attributes that of the ideology. So you had the people who were the most afraid of and unhappy with the international economy in the party of free trade. And so I long thought, the ideology and the voting base were going to come into alignment one way or the other. And what I always hoped was that you could bring the vote. Since I shared the ideology, you have to go find the voting base. So that, when you and I first knew each other, my theme then, during the Obama years, was you needed a republicanism that was culturally modern, environmentally responsible, and economically inclusive. Because I was worried about, all those hardware store managers and who had 401ks who were drifting out of the Republican Party to the Democrats. Instead, what happened was the party signed up. The party kept its voting base, and the result is you have now a party who's stated is protectionist and fearful, inward-looking, bigoted, afraid, unwilling to bear international responsibilities. So, when you say when you ask about the DeSantis strategy, I mean, he and whether the indictments help. Yes, if you are people who feel that way, if you feel persecuted, if you feel like you are alienated from the system, then yeah, an indictment may help. But what does that tell you about the kind of political party you're going to be? Because such people, well, you're going to get the QAnon party, which believes stupid things, crazy things, which rejects modern medicine, won't take a vaccine during a pandemic. You know, is betraying America's international responsibilities. There's Winston Churchill is right over your left shoulder. There's a big uproar during the Obama years where Obama was supposed to have removed a bust of Churchill from the Oval Office. And this was partly an honest misunderstanding and partly a hoax. But the implication of the story, and we can go to the backstory, it doesn't matter, but the implication of the story was that Obama, because of his exotic background, did not appreciate Western values, NATO, our allies, and wouldn't defend them. So a decade on, the Republicans are right now behaving worse than Stanley Baldwin and Neville Chamberlain. I mean, the Stanley Baldwin and Neville Chamberlain had genuinely something to be afraid of when they were also quietly rearming, even as they appeased Nazi Germany. But the Republicans in Congress were moving toward the 100th day of their blockade of aid to Ukraine. The Ukrainians are running out of ammunition, not because of any objective difficulty, but because a faction of a party has put a stop to America's. And that's, that goes with you. That is what happens when you indulge the victimology that says being indicted is a plus, not a minus. Being indicted in a case, by the way, where you're probably going to be convicted. You're not indicted because you're an innocent person. You're indicted because you're super guilty. What kind of party do you get?
Do you think so? I started, I started off as a conservative blogger at places like Human Events and townhall.com. Then I went to AOL's Politics Daily. And it was around this time that I started writing critical things I started seeing things in the Republican Party that bothered me as a conservative, right? This is when Sarah Palin really kind of radicalized and started playing the victim card. And you had Sharon Angle and Christine O'Donnell and I'm not a witch. And it seemed like the party they were playing identity politics, victimhood, all that stuff that I just inherently seemed unconservative to me. And I've wrote my book Too Dumb to Fail. January 2016 it came out. So I've really tried to document and cover the move from Reagan Republicanism to Trump, but I still don't completely understand what happened. My question is, because obviously I wanted the conservative movement and the Republican Party to become more inclusive, to appeal to our better angels, but also bring in, Hispanics and college-educated folks, and be a beacon of hope, and all the stuff that Reagan said and that I actually believed. And instead, obviously, it went a very different direction. The question I have for you is there a different world where Marco Rubio and Nikki Haley ran this party, Um, or was this inevitable based on other trends, demographic trends, cultural trends? Like, was this did the Republican Party do the rational thing, or could it have gone the other way?
Well, those are slightly different questions, um, because inevitability is a big word. And inevitability removes the element of human choice that is inherent to all human activity. So when you say, you ask this, you rephrase that, was, do the Republican Party behave rationally? So yes, at each moment along the path, the choices that were collectively made, and there's no Republican Party, there's no central brain, but the choices that were collectively made reflected immediate rationality. There was always a reason why people did what they did. But there were, of course, other options and other ways it might have gone. And events played a hand too. Um, if the Iraq War had been more successful, which I believe it could have been, if Bush had not been so consumed by the Iraq War that he neglected the many warning signs that things were going crazy in the housing market in 2006. And instead of saying, this is the only good news we have,
Right.
let's continue to greenlight what's going on in the housing market. If there had been some regulatory restraint on the housing market in 2006, 2007, there would obviously have still been a real estate slump. Things go up, they go down. But it might not have ramified through the whole world economy in the way that it did because of the regulatory decisions that happened in the Bush years, largely because Bush himself was not paying attention. So those things might have been different. Look, there were differences in 2008, 10, 12, and sometimes, one of the most important differences would be, here's really the path not taken. What if 1,000 influential people in the Republican world in 2016 had said, "This guy Trump is bad news. I'm not giving a check. I'm for, my friends and I are sort of going to lean a little bit toward Hillary Clinton, or we're going to try to lose this election." So what would have happened if the Republicans had lost the presidency in 2016? They would still have had the House, and they still would have had the Senate. Hillary Clinton would not have been able to govern she would have had to make a lot of concessions and compromises. Of course, the Supreme Court would not have, they wouldn't have put as conservative people on the court, but nor would they have been super liberal people either because of the Republican hold on the Senate. And then the Republican majority would, of course, have grown in 2018 because at that point we're into the halfway election through the third Democratic consecutive presidential term. That's never good for the incumbent party. And then in 2020, they'd have run the board, and they would have run the board with somebody more normal. And then the world would now look different. And the Republicans would not be the party of disgrace and shame and betrayal on Ukraine. They would be who they used to be. So there were options. But at each stage, people made what seemed like immediately rational choices, and that had a progressively destructive result. Whenever you look back on a bad outcome, that there are forks along the road, and you can explain why the person who took the wrong fork, but there were always forks. There were always decision moments where there was a different path that could have been taken.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, as you brought up things like if Romney had gotten elected, which not a crazy possibility in 2012, maybe that would have changed it. Do you believe that could there have been so like go back to Rubio Haley? That's the kind of conservatism that I had an affinity toward. Back in 2016, is there an audience for them? Like let's say that things had gone a little differently, and let's say that Republicans had lost. Is there a constituency for that type of republicanism?
My father began his career as a dentist, and one of his patients was Howie Mandel, the future. Grew up in Toronto, and because of that, I got tickets to some of Howie Mandel's early improv shows. And I remember seeing one. I must have been in high school, where Howie Mandel came on the stage and he said, "Okay, I'm going to do some improv for you all. Give me a situation. You're at the drugstore. Okay, give me a place. You're at the drugstore. Give me a situation. You're stuck in line behind an old lady. Okay, great. Now give me some funny things to say." Okay, that's Marco Rubio. Is there an audience for what Marco Rubio? Marco Rubio is an audience. Like one of the things he's graphically proven, Marco Rubio would never lead anybody anywhere. He is one of nature's followers. He is broken on the inside. It's crazy to make him president. He
No,
doesn't
no,
have.
I agree. I think in hindsight, we
When you say,
know.
but
Yeah.
the point is, when you say, was there an audience? Yes. If look, obviously, if somebody had written the lines for him and guaranteed that the room would applaud, he would, like Howie Mandel, say them. But if you say, um, that you mentioned Bill Clinton a minute ago, that moment where Bill Clinton, facing defeat in New Hampshire and disgrace because he's losing because of the sexual scandal and his marriage is going to go, goes into a room of laid off factory workers and says, I'm not bringing your jobs back. I'm going to help you find other jobs, but I'm not bringing your jobs back. Is that Marco Rubio? It's ridiculous. Imagine him ever telling a room full of people anything they didn't want to hear. And ditto for Nikki Haley. So um, the incentive structure of the Republican Party has made it very difficult for people to, at any given moment, apply the brakes because we selected for people, the Republican Party selected for people who were weak on the inside. And that's one of the reasons that Trump was able to dominate them. Um, you know, uh,
What? Explain that
I,
to me. I think you're right.
why didn't Jeb Bush remember that moment in 2016 where Jeb Bush demanded that Trump apologize to his wife, and Trump didn't, and Jeb Bush sort of simpered. Like what? Like Trump's obviously not going to apologize. Why didn't you go and say, "Listen, you fat crook, you talk about my wife one more time like that, I'm walking over there and I'm punching you in your overweight gut." You're such a tough guy. Here's a jar of pickles. I bet you $100 you can't open it. Like, um, uh, like those they were beaten on the inside, and of course they couldn't tell people, yes, we're going to defend Ukraine, and I don't care what Tucker Carlson says. Tucker Carlson's a liar. He says exactly the opposite. His father's a paid lobbyist for the Hungarian regime. What are you talking about? No, I'm not
Okay,
listening
but
to Carlson.
Ronald Reagan was, in my opinion, the real deal. George W. Bush would have kicked somebody's ass
Yeah,
if they messed with him or Laura. John McCain is a hero.
yeah,
You just said that the Republican Party sort of self-selected for weak people.
yeah.
And I'm open to that possibility because God knows they were. Like, I think Trump did expose the fact that Rubio and Nikki and Jeb, these elites were, I don't even know what they were weak, right? For lack of a better word. But how did the party
Yeah, I
like
think that,
incentivize weak people rising?
I think the inflection point is about the year 2010. So what happens is the traditional leadership struggles, the structures of the party lead into Iraq and lead to the global financial crisis. And this happens at exactly the moment that the baby boom generation is going into its retirement years. And you can actually I wrote a lot about this. I had a big article in Foreign Affairs with a lot of the polling data published about 2010. You can see the white baby boomers becoming radically more conservative between 2008 and 2012. It's a remarkable thing, and
Look at
it's about
Roseanne Barr.
yeah,
Used to be a
it's about
progressive.
entering their 60s. It's about entering their 60s at a time when asset values are collapsing and their homes are collapsing. It's about Obama and racial politics for sure. Not in a, I don't want to say sort of immediately they saw a black face, but Obama was such a, you know, first black president, president with a Muslim name, president with a foreign national father, um, uh, you know, a product of the cities, a product of the universities. I mean, he represented not just one kind of unwelcome change, but half a dozen in one body, half a dozen. And also, Obama's affect was so superior. So it wasn't just he was not only all these exotic and alien things that you mistrusted, but he was an exotic and an alien who thought he was smarter and better dressed and better behaved.
Uppity.
Yeah, yeah. But Karl Rove has this bitter line that Obama is the person at the party who's standing in a corner making derogatory comments about the way everyone else is behaving. And there's this, yeah, Obama had this affect of superiority. So all of these things happen at the same time, and then the Tea Party movement emerges partly spontaneously, partly through funding by the Koch brothers. And Republican elites persuade themselves that this movement of paranoia is in fact a demand for limited government, which I mean, you can't have attended 2 Tea Party rallies and believe that. But if you wanted to believe it, I guess you could talk yourself into the project. And so Paul Ryan comes to the fore, and so what you get is the combination of, you don't get any rethinking of the parts of the program that are weak. You get doubling down on exactly the parts of the program that are least popular.
Yeah.
Why don't we really cut Medicare, and why don't we really cut Social Security? That's what those Tea Party people with their, Obama is Hitler placards want, and their open display of guns. They want less Medicare, and so that's where the decay of the establishment happens because of Iraq and the financial crisis. Then the establishment makes a huge willful misunderstanding of what the Tea Party movement is, veers economically right at exactly the moment it should have been veering economically toward the more inclusive and more centrist side, and then the whole rotten structure is ready to have its door kicked in by Donald Trump, which he proceeds to do, because Trump is nothing if not an astute reader of people's fears and hatreds.
So it sounds like you're saying around 2010, the mob took over, and therefore, to be a successful Republican politician during that era, you have to either be crazy enough, true believer, to be on board with the mob, or a weak person who's willing to tell the mob what they want.
Yes, I think that's what happened. That's very well said. So when you say, what was the decision moment? Um, uh, you know, I think Mitt Romney had the right concept, but he was very much the wrong. He was the worst possible image for 2012, because he was a kind of Obama of the Mormons, right? I mean, he was just an effortlessly successful and superior human being, handsome, rich, healthy, beautiful wife, beautiful family, everything that the Republican Party was ceasing to be.
Everything we hate.
Yeah. Well, everything that would normally command deference, but at a time when, and he was then running on the Paul Ryan message of less of everything for you, and he was right about making healthcare more universal. That could have been a different kind of message, but I think that's when you say why was the party ready for Trump? And so what you've had over the 20 years, you've had this outmigration of basically people who are comfortable in America as it is, particularly, which is sort of expressed by the phrase college educated, but that's not really quite it. More women than men, but the people basically say, I look around the world and I see a place where I feel at home, and they are leaving the Republican Party. And then there's this immigration into the Republican Party, or this migration into it, of people look at the world and say, I do not feel at home here. I don't recognize this world. I don't like it. I don't understand it. So I'm ready to believe that Bill Gates and Klaus Schwab are putting transistor radios into my body through a vaccine.
Which is the opposite of the way it used to be. Like in the 60s, the radical blame America first crowd, who, let's take on the establishment, man. That was the left. And Republicans were like, yeah, maybe America's not perfect, but our institutions are really good. There's a chance for social mobility here. This is still the greatest country in the world. I trust the police. I trust the president. All of that stuff. It's flip-flopped, and that's why the Rosie O'Donnell has flip-flopped, right?
Now I think it was true in...
Sorry, Roseanne Barr. If
yes.
I said Roseanne, you know where I'm going.
Yes. Yeah, they're sort of, it's a natural mistake. One of the things that is clever about the series Mad Men is that there's not much politics in Mad Men, but one of the things that makes clear is that in the 1960s, politics are a social marker. And so all the people in the Mad Men, they're of course Republicans, not because they have any particular views, but because they're at home in the world. And people who were at home in the world in those days became Republicans, and people who had wanted to change the world became Democrats, to simplify absurdly. Now, unfortunately, today's Republicans don't want to change the world, because that would require you have to change the world. You have to understand it. They fear the world, and they're looking for explanations of their fear, and that makes them very vulnerable to all kinds of bad information and misleading claims.
A couple more topics, and I'll get you out of here. I wanted to ask you about Donald Trump. He held up his hands the other day, and he had these weird red sores on them.
Yeah,
Some people think it's from playing golf. Some people, James Carville said it's syphilis. Any
I'm not.
thoughts on that?
I have no thoughts on that. I, I sort of disapprove of the speculation about it because, uh, um, look, if I were to bring in highly nonspecific symptoms to my own doctor, we'd have a long examination, and I probably want a second opinion. So the idea that I'm going to do it, from bits I see on YouTube, I don't know. I don't feel.
Yeah.
I don't feel we know anything about that. I mean, obviously he's not a healthy man, but you didn't need to see those dots to know that.
Yeah, I'm not comfortable speculating. I wouldn't. I think it's irresponsible of Carville to speculate like that. Having said that, it would explain a lot. So who
Yeah,
knows? Thoughts
Donald
on?
Trump's he's not a healthy man, and I think one of the we had this moment years ago on this podcast where I talked about how Trump voters need to eat more salmon, and this became.
Yes.
But there's something about Trump's an unhealthy person, and a lot of part of his appeal. And there's this crazy thing that happened during the Obama years where Michelle Obama made it her cause to promote healthier eating, which God knows is a cause that is needed. Um, and uh, and this became like this point of derision. And Sarah Palin, remember, who's probably one of the most physically fit people, certainly at that point, one of the most physically fit people ever to be in politics. I mean, she's lean, she's slim, she was a runner, she was an athlete, she was a great basketball player as a young person. She then, who obviously watched very carefully what she herself ate, she had these events where I'm serving people cookies that she herself would never have eaten in order to,
Yeah. She
denounce
drank
Michelle
like a
Obama.
big gulp at CPAC one year. Do you remember that? Like she had this huge Diet Coke. Who knows? But yeah.
I can believe she's a Diet Coke addict, but I don't believe that she would
No.
ever drink a Slurpee. Uh,
Yeah. Well, I don't think I would venture that Coke is healthier for you than Diet Coke, to
oh,
be
okay.
honest. But you're right. In terms of getting fat, maybe it's not.
Yeah. Um, but so Trump is an unhealthy person who makes a fetish of his unhealthiness, and that's enough of an issue without us saying, what are those pink dots? Who knows? I am neither a doctor nor do I play one on TV.
Any thoughts on the indictments, the trials that we haven't already
Yeah,
discussed?
one of the things I'm surprised by, and George Conway gave warning, was he always said watch the Jean Carroll case because it's just on a faster timeline, and they may be about to hand Trump a huge um, second wave of defamation awards. Um, and I mean, the fact that Nikki Haley would say, I have no opinion on whether my opponent who's been adjudicated to be liable for sexual assault, like you're running as a woman against Mr. Grab him by the pussy, and you will not make use of a sexual assault civil finding in your campaign. Um, I think the criminal part of the system is, I think there's something going on here where, consciously or not, probably not, the collective judicial system of the United States is saying to America, we will not save you. This do not shift that we will if he loses, we will punish him. But do not look to us to do this in advance for you because we are somehow tacitly or consciously deciding we are just holding all of these proceedings back. And I don't think that, I think it now looks like, I doubt, would be very, very surprised if there's anything much in the criminal domain that happens before November. That just, it's a slow process anyway, and it's obviously going extra slow. Some Judge Eileen Cannon, maybe for malicious reasons, other people for non-malicious reasons. Perhaps I shouldn't, maybe she's not, maybe she's intuiting the same thing. Maybe she's saying, this is not my job. I'm not going, and anyway, I'm not going to do it for you. So my thought is, and uh, something I said a lot in 2016, there are no institutions, there are only people. And so don't look to the institutions don't say the institutions will save me if you won't save yourself.
Yeah. We should see that as like icing on the cake or the last pray as if it all depends on God, work as if it all depends on you, kind of.
Nice phrase. I like that.
It's there, but don't count on it being there. Earlier, you mentioned we're talking about Winston Churchill over my shoulder here, and you mentioned Republicans not supporting Ukraine funding. It seems like the latest development in Congress, David, is that Democrats are ready to make a deal to fund Ukraine in exchange for doing something on the border. And it seems like Republicans have decided, wait a second, we don't actually want to fix the border because that could help. That could help Joe Biden.
Yeah. Well, let's go a little deeper on the Republican claims on the border. Uh, Republicans will say, look, we don't want Biden's $14 billion because he's not closing the border. What we want is the border closed. And that reflects a willful misunderstanding or maybe intentional misleading of what the nature of the border problem is and why you do need money to fix it. In years past, when people crossed the border, they were truly illegal immigrants. The border crosser of, say, the year 1995 or 2005 was an unattached male in prime working years, typically from Mexico, maybe from Guatemala or El Salvador, who was trying to elude detection in order to get into the interior of the country and take a job. That person wanted no contact with federal authorities. For a lot of reasons which we don't have time for, that profile has changed. And today's border crosser is a minor or a family that are seeking contact. They're going to make an asylum claim. They're not going to be illegal. They're going to make an asylum claim. Now, it is unauthorized in the sense that their asylum claim has about a 90% chance of being rejected ultimately, maybe a little less. But they are seeking contact with federal authorities so that they can enter the pipeline where they will be given provisional papers. They will be allowed to drive. They will be allowed to work. They will then be released probably into the interior of the country, and they will then spend 10 years in the asylum system. And when they were ultimately rejected, then they will become illegal. So the reason you need resources is this asylum system is created by laws and treaties. You can't just wait. The idea you wave a wand and say, let's make it go away. You can't add judicial precedents. There are a whole lot of agreements, statutes, precedents that bind the hands of what the executive branch can do. One thing you can do in the very short term is process these applications faster because they are overwhelmingly likely to be rejected. So if you process the asylum claims faster, you can get to the rejection faster, maybe even immediately, and exclude them from the country faster in compliance with the laws that it's going to be difficult to change and treat international treaties too. And so Biden's $14 billion is about hiring adjudicators to say, I'm going to hear your asylum claim. Now, the Republicans are right to say that's a Band-Aid, and you actually have to deal with the structure of law, precedent, and treaties that has turned asylum from what was supposed to be an unusual process to something where we're getting millions of people a year, and overwhelming the system, making it, by the way, impossible for authentic asylum seekers ever to get a hearing because the system's so clogged. Yes, they're right that resources alone won't do it, but without resources, you get nowhere. And as you said, this is an excuse. The $14 billion would be money well spent, given the present structure of law that governs the border.
All right, David. And then lastly, I wanted to ask you, I know you just got back from Mexico, I think doing some reporting down there. What are you looking at?
So the biggest delta on things that are important versus things that Americans pay attention to is Mexico. And we are heading for, I was there partly to visit friends and just pick up, partly to have fun because I love the country so much. But I was able to go to a political rally for the main opposition presidential candidate in Oaxaca City. I'm interviewing her in D.C. shortly. Mexico is heading toward an election on June 2nd of 2024 that will be free but not fair, and that is going to be a big rollback of 30 years of democratic progress. And in a context where one of the tools of authoritarianism in Mexico is the interconnection, complicated but real, between the governing party and organized crime. The governing party isn't exactly enthralled. They use organized crime as kind of a weapon against their opponents. Mexico's become an incredibly violent place. And this is just a story that Americans will not pay attention to, but must, because when it goes south, it is south. When it goes wrong, The consequences are so enormous. All of America's strategic freedom to act in the world has depended on the fact that it has stability on its borders. Unlike other superpowers, Russia doesn't have stability on its borders. China doesn't have stability on its borders. India doesn't. But the United States has had it. Friendly relationships with Canada, stable relationships with Mexico. You lose the stable relationship with Mexico. And we haven't seen that since the days of the Mexican Revolution in the 1910s. But when there's real instability in Mexico, as there was during the Revolution time, Pancho Villa raiding towns in New Mexico, that will become such an obsessive fact for the United States. There will be no American energy to do anything else. Goodbye protecting the shipping in the Red Sea. Goodbye Ukraine, because we'll be focused on this problem that could be prevented today with relatively minor increments. If it becomes bad, it will be the biggest problem the United States has.
All right. Well, to be continued. A lot to digest there. Anything you want to plug? Things you've written? Follow him on Twitter at David
I have one
Frum.
thing to plug, which is if people know, I've got February of 2024 is the 100th anniversary of the death of Woodrow Wilson in February 1924. And I have an enormous piece posting in the Atlantic sometime in the next week, arguing against the cancellation of Woodrow Wilson from American honor. And it's basically a book that I've been working on for a while. And we were able to compress it into a mere 7,000 words. There's a lot more to say, but I hope people will take the trouble, because it's not just about Woodrow Wilson personally. It's about the habit of saying, let us look into the past, search for flaws, and pull our heroes down from pedestals because they have flaws. And what happens when you allow that pulling down from pedestal process to go unchecked? And it's an article about how do you think about people who are flawed but who have done great things. And it also is there's a lot of disinformation. There's a lot of myths about Wilson's. Many of the stated flaws are actually untrue, or made up, or misunderstandings. And so I deal with many of them too. So I hope people will read that. It is an undertaking, but I hope it will be at least engagingly written. But when you think, God, this looks long, just remember it could have been a lot longer.
Well, this sounds like it's going to launch a 1,000 takes and think pieces responding to you. And there may be some controversy. So stay tuned for that. I look forward to reading it. David Frum, always
Thank
a
you.
pleasure. Thank you for coming back on the news.
Thank you. Bye-bye.